A look back at 2018 and how it will influence 2019. Virginia's governor, with bipartisan backing, supports tolls for Interstate 81. Black Smoke Matters posts a list of industry concerns. Trucking companies exposed to new liability risk after FMCSA preemption. Daimler is just one step away from fully autonomous semi-trucks. And freight brokers cautiously optimistic in the new year, but there's an ominous counterpoint. I'm JP.
And I'm Chad.
And we discuss all these issues and more on this week's episode of What the Truck.
And today we are visited by Chief Analytics Officer Dean Krogh, driver of the Grumpy Pete, the 2003 Peterbilt.
Hi guys.
Did I get that right?
You did. No, you've got it spot on. Well done.
Great to have you here to help us assimilate some of these varied and intense headlines. JP, what are you cracking open today? Wait a minute.
I'm actually, if I'm a little low energy, it's because I'm drinking tap water. You know, it's wet. It's slightly below room temperature. I'm getting a little alkaline, but you know, it is what it is, Chad. What do you got?
I'm so disappointed. I'm not sure where to begin. I'm still trying to be consistent, though, sir. Having a Basecamp blonde, a Hutton Smith Basecamp blonde going pale ale, little 4.8 ABV, keeping it light, keeping it,
Good for you.
Well, thanks.
New year, new you.
Apparently, new you.
Not for long.
Oh, okay.
So let's get into it. We can start off with this sort of extended piece by Donald Broughton. That sort of looks back at the economy and the freight economy in 2018 and kind of tries to see what it's going to look like going forward. I think that one of the big kind of takeaways, one of the things we should underline, one of the sentences that really stood out from the piece was Broughton saying that whatever else the history books say about 2018, it will go on record as one of the strongest years for spot pricing and contract pricing increases in the history of trucking in the United States.
Actually, he in no uncertain terms, he says that it will go down as the strongest year on record for spot and contract pricing in the history of U.S. trucking, because after the spot market rate increases of over 30% in dry van and reefer, there were also spot market increases of over 25% in flatbed, which were followed by contract rate increases of over 15% in all three modes. So it's certainly a high bar it's like walking the tight wire. We're at a very, how much higher, I suppose, can we go?
And I mean, I think everyone knows that that kind of growth isn't sustainable. It was a pretty wild year. Not only was the economy growing at a great clip. I mean, I think at one point, what was it, the third quarter, or was the second quarter that it was that GDP growth broke 4%. I mean,
it was around that time. It seems like
the middle of the. So it's like we know that it's not going to be like that forever. There were these sort of external factors that constrained capacity, like the ELD mandate, hard enforcement beginning in April. There were policy things, with the tariffs that really confused shippers and sort of altered the flow of freight, and that uncertainty tended to drive up prices. So
many of these things we've been kind of covering as we anticipated the end of 2018 and have been coming here hot at you at the beginning of 2019.
Yeah, I mean, so just reflecting on the year, I mean, it was tough for a lot of shippers. It was great for carriers. If you weren't making money as a carrier this year, good luck in 2019. I think the brokers were kind of trying to ride the tiger and stay alive and, try to feel out the market and stay ahead of those waves.
And we're going to touch on those too. I think one of the things that in this report, which I encourage our listeners to check out, it's substantive. Is one of the things that, we're trying to make sense of what to expect in 2019, and a lot of brokers and others are saying that they just have no idea and be a little careful. And yes, volumes are high, but Broughton brings kind of a systematic look over the past decade and a half, sort of the cycles that we've been going through, and he considers that right now there is he says we see no factual basis for the assertion that there is an imminent recession headed for us in 2019, because he sees us just as about 24 months into kind of a consumer cycle of expansion.
Yeah, he is basically said. I mean, people in the industry who remember 2016 as being a very bad year for freight,
a mini recession.
I think WTI, the price of oil fell apart at the end of 2015. And
and that played a big factor. The margins of fracking have to stay above a certain margin.
Exactly. They dropped from over $100 a barrel to under $30 a barrel very quickly. So it's an interesting take. I mean, what Broughton is saying is that we're not at the end of an expansionary cycle that started in 2009. We're halfway or a few years into an expansionary cycle that started in 2016. I mean, I think that's sort of an interesting read. It's a little contrarian, maybe. That's not how most economists think about it, at least the people that I read. But I mean, there might be something to it as far as the freight economy goes.
Really, what are they suggesting? Those that you're reading, how what kind of pushback would you say to his sort of thesis?
Just that unemployment, or
plays into it.
Employment has been growing, steadily since 2009. People when we think about what kind of legs does the economy still have left, you have to think about, okay, where is the growth going to come from, right? And so that's kind of when people say okay, well, people are, the consumer savings rate is already pretty low. Everyone's that wants a job can get one. Wages are going up. I mean, it's what's the next thing that can spur another round of true economic production. One
of the things, though, from that high height of how high those contract rates and spot rate market rates rose, where will they go here? Will they be stable? Will they go slightly down? Or is it achievable, as Broughton suggests, that they actually could still possibly rise 3 to 5%? Under certain conditions, such as if their capacity remains tight enough.
I'm kind of interested to hear what Dean thinks about this.
Yeah, I think last year, 2018, is not a year that I'd be comparing to. I think there were so many anomalous things that happened last year.
Right.
Whether you're talking about tax regulations, the impact of tariffs on the market, the ELD mandate, the sort of the exacerbation of the aging workforce, the driver shortage. There's a few things that happened last year that I don't think will be here this time around. So I actually don't think there'll be the upward pressure on rates that we were seeing last year. I think there's been a lot of capacity come into the market. So we had record Class 8 truck orders. Used truck prices are still holding pretty firm. So I think this will be an interesting year. There's some things happening that haven't happened before around diesel prices. With the IMO 2020 and the ULSD regulations in Mexico. So there's a few things that could suggest diesel prices could go up, putting upward pressure on operating costs. I think this will be a much tighter year than people think, because I think if I was a truck operator running freight, I wouldn't be basing my operating costs on last year, nor would I be basing my top-line revenue projections. I would be scaling that right down, because I just don't see the same drivers this year as there were last year.
Okay.
I think the ATA really kind of wants to cast its spell and maintain this collective fiction that things are still tight, like demand is still exceeding capacity, we're asking for rate increases, but honestly, I've talked to several brokers in the past couple days, including at our event at Freight Alley, on Wednesday, who said that no, like they've had to redo some of their bids for contracted freight and are coming in 3% lower.
Whoa!
And it's it has to do with the spot market, the spot rates pulling contract down. They're trying to protect themselves going into 2019, so they want to get as much committed freight as they can, and they're having to be really aggressive about it.
The other thing is a lot of shippers and carriers and brokers now have a lot more visibility into the markets through our sonar platform, which is new.
Yeah.
Right, so people can actually react to the market much quicker and take different positions in the market than they would have normally.
Wow.
Because normally shippers are the kind of the last people to find out what's going on. When I've been out talking to shippers, they're actually now really in tune with what the suppliers of their capacity are doing and how the spot market might be behaving. I think that's going to be very different this year.
That is going to be a story to follow throughout the year, I think, too, Dean. Shippers had to get a little more disciplined over 2018. Yeah. Now, I mean, will it be a proactive approach rather
if you
than
think about
defensive?
ELDs has probably dropped another 2 million telematics devices onto the market. So now you've got all these trucks that didn't have any connectivity now connected to the market, whether they've got an SDK on their phone connected to a big data aggregator that's got visibility in the supply chain. These independent truckers now have apps on phones where they can pick and choose loads and get paid on a 7-day basis. So what I think is different this year is that a lot of the industry will have much more visibility into the freight market, but they can react quicker.
Wow,
that's going to be significant.
Cool insight, and it's a substantive and insightful, with a little bit of history behind it, report from Broughton, and more than we can completely digest right now. But anyway, a little analysis and assimilation of that report. But now on to we have a number of headlines to tackle, and this one, the Virginia's governor. This is a little infrastructure kind of discussion now. Like basically, Virginia's governor, and they call it bipartisan report. I think it is actually mostly Republicans with a Democrat, but they support. They're really like trying to do a quick let's get this done type of legislation to get to for this proposal to from the Virginia governor Ralph Northam to get this interstate. It's Interstate 81, that corridor that kind of runs vertically, kind of diagonally for 325 miles through a lot of Virginia. It's an important corridor. It is, if you've ever been on it, it is tense and really just it's over capacity, as we would say. But anyway, they're looking at it's one of those things where you just feel like if you're in the logistics industry that you're getting picked on sometimes, because basically for a truck, if during the day if a truck was going to run the full 325 miles, that because of the average of the tolling, that trucker would end up paying about $50 in tolls, and a passenger car would pay about half of that, 25. Now at night it's greatly reduced. But what are truckers supposed to do? Like suddenly start traveling it all at night? I don't know. And Dean, I don't know what is your feeling on tolls and tolling?
So there's on the downside, there's a lot that it leaves an electronic fingerprint wherever you go. So it means there's a digital record of where you are. So if everything's not above board, then there's a digital fingerprint that says you were here at this point in time.
Well, isn't that already the case with ELDs?
Yes, to a degree.
Okay.
But there's, for those that don't want to run interstates and hit scales all the time,
yeah,
it might be more weight-based or revenue-based. They might not want to have...
So you're thinking about a privacy kind of issue.
There's a privacy issue. There's a cost issue. There's a huge cost issue. But then on the upside, you've got better fuel efficiency, higher average road speed, you cover more miles. So if you price the tolls into your rate the rate component of your business, then I think they're actually a really good thing. The challenge is that they where carriers get caught is they have contracts where they've had these bids out there, and there's a new road user charge come in and it hasn't been factored into the contract. That's where tolls start to become a grind.
Well, they estimate that they need $2.2 billion, and while I admit that I don't know where they're necessarily going to get that money from, I'm not a fan. What about you, JP?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think that on the one hand, the industries that use the infrastructure to make money, it's fair to ask them to help pay for it. On the other hand, I think doubling the tolls for trucks versus cars is just kind of mean. But but I think there is one potential upside is that, and actually Ibrahim Bayan, our chief economist, actually talked a little bit about this with regard to traffic in Atlanta. He used to live next to a toll road, and he loved it because the tolls were so expensive that no one else drove on the road. But he would pay for it, and so he got to actually move through Atlanta on a relatively uncongested thoroughfare.
He had this kind of argument of, I'm going to work, so I will have a little more money to pay for this, and I'm happy to pay it so that I will not be on as congested.
And then they took the toll off the road, and now
it takes them
twice as long to move around. But so what if this becomes, the fast lane through Virginia instead of the slow lane? What if it becomes a much more efficient highway? What if, a truck, a carrier is like, oh, okay, this makes sense. I mean, we're charging $2 a mile to go 350 miles, so it's, it'll take $50 off $700 but
who bears the cost of tolls though? In the end, I mean, will rates increase? Will we have to pay more money for our shipping costs? Does it suppress the economy in certain areas? Does it discourage businesses from doing business in these areas? I wonder. I mean, I guess at some point it needs to be paid for somehow, some way. I mean, if you're using it
really sucks to be you if you're a shipper and you've got two distribution centers at either end of this interstate and you run trucks up and down this road all day. That's going to hurt.
I guess at the same time, toward that end, that means you are really using it, and you should help pay for that infrastructure. I don't know.
Well, it's a bit like ELDs, right? It's the extra cost of compliance now is going to be borne by the consumer, ultimately, whether it be increased transit time, higher rates because trucks can't be as efficient as they used to be. So I think at some point it gets passed on to the end consumer, but it also becomes a factor in the competitiveness of different modes. So if you've got higher road user charges, at some point do you become uncompetitive versus other modes of transport? Rail.
I think that does matter. I mean, I think it depends on the kind of commodity and product that the shipper is making as to how much will be passed on to the consumer. Some kinds of commodities are treated, some kinds of products are treated in a commodity-like fashion where they're fungible and you can't actually just pass through extra cost to the consumer because all of a sudden if what you're selling is just as good as what your competitor is selling, then people just buy that. So it depends. I mean,
Sorry, I didn't cut you off.
But I think the larger story is just that in the absence, now that we are back in an era of divided government in the U.S. Congress, with the Democrats controlling the House of Representatives and the Republicans still in the Senate, I think the prospects for an infrastructure bill, may be dimming. I mean, people talk about this as being the one issue that that both sides want, but they actually have very different visions as to how it would work. So what I kind of see is now the states are trying to pay for their infrastructure with tolls. Is this going to be a new kind of creeping sort of toll movement that moves across the country, again, in the absence of federal action on infrastructure.
Well, that you bring that up, I think the ATA, this is one of their major legal challenges for this year. They are very concerned about this idea. They what Rhode Island has proposed with this tolling,
because they're tolling only trucks, right?
Yeah, and
Which
so
seems
it's a little outrageous to just like pick on our industry, which is bringing goods to everybody all the time. I mean, I'm like,
right. I mean, it's kind of the chicken or the egg thing, because we talked about how the people who use the infrastructure should pay for it, but at the same time, the reason why you build transportation infrastructure is to encourage economic exchange and commercial activity. Right. And now that it's here, now you're turning around and you're punishing it. It's just kind of, it's the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing.
So here's where tolls become almost something you have to bring into your business. If you think about ELDs, right, where now...
It's like a fixed cost?
Well, yeah, because if a truck company can't put more freight on or put more trailers on, the only thing you really compete on is transit time. So you put 2 drivers in a truck to increase your transit time. So your sustainable competitive advantage in trucking is essentially based around the transit time, the delivery schedule. So if tolls actually help you get quicker, that gives you get to the delivery point quicker, that gives you a competitive advantage. And what it does is it forces almost everybody to start to accept it. And I went through this in Australia.
Oh, really?
Where the transit time, you could look at transit times on toll roads, could almost take an hour off a 700-mile journey. Now, that's significant in terms of being able to unload and load. So what it did is as soon as the big companies started doing it, everybody else got in line quickly because they realised that they couldn't compete on transit time because everybody had the same dimension trucks and trailers.
Right.
That's where tolls become a big deal.
Well, this will be an interesting story to follow throughout the year. Something that certainly has manifested that seems like an unusual kind of story is the Black Smoke Matters movement. JP, do you have some background? You want to just kind of tell us what the Black Smoke Matters movement is?
It's a lot. It's a sort of a protest movement that emerged online. It seems to be mostly owner operators, although I really don't know. They're planning a trucking strike in April.
And it's kind of seems to be a follow up from there was a protest in October in which a number of truckers parked their trucks in around the mall area in Washington D.C. in a protest to overregulation and the ELDs, and this seems to be that didn't do us any good, so now we're going to take it up here. We have a few points that they're what they're looking for, and Dean, I know you have some takes on this. I will just quickly not summarize, but I will just point out the things that they are among the complaints that the Black Smoke Matters. What they've outlined is they've talked about the Unfunded Mandate Act, which I find somewhat obscure, but at least officially it is. There was in 1995 there was the Unfunded Mandates Reform Act, and it directed government. And if you can follow me with the act directs government agencies to limit the number of unfunded federal mandates imposed by the federal government on state, local, and tribal governments. And the Black Smoke Matters movement claims that when the FMCSA implemented the ELD regulation, it based its assumptions on a paperwork reduction cost saving that is not applicable to 99.1% of the small trucking businesses that make up the trucking industry.
Yes, but see, okay, sorry, go
Yeah, and let's just hit all these real quickly. They're also just parking and hours of service is an issue that they're taking up. Cybersecurity. And then just basic old constitutional rights, however sort of not super clear those are articulated. But those are some big ones. Dean, you've been tweeting about this a little bit.
Yeah. What? Yeah, bad name. Wrong choice of name in an industry that's already struggling with a bad image. Awful name. But
what do you mean by that?
The last thing you want to do is be creating this image that the industry is not clean and green. Right? People don't want to see black smoke pouring out of trucks.
Yeah.
Now that's
Black smoke matters.
They kind of want to go back to a time that doesn't exist anymore, and the problem is that industry representation is the key. And I'll give you a quick backdrop. 40 years ago last week, I participated in a blockade in Australia where we literally were blockading over all the same things and the same issues, and not a lot changed. And in Australia, it wasn't hard to shut down the country because you only had to block one highway.
What highway is that?
The Hume Highway, and it was called the Razorback Blockade in January 1979. And we shut down for about 11 days. And I was my father was the driver, and I was with my father when we got caught up in all of it. So it's a fascinating.
So this isn't dating you too much.
No, exactly. So that's but a lot of miles have been in between. But what I realised was that they were fighting about the same issues: excessive road user charges, burdensome regulation, lack of parking, blah blah. So what happened? What happened was I ended up running the Australian Trucking Association about 25 years later.
Wow.
And it was a fascinating experience because it taught me that you can't take everybody on individually like you're doing here. You have to have a very strong voice, and industry representation is the key. And if I look at all the list of things that the Black Smoke Matters guys are working on, and I totally support some of them, especially parking and hours of service, I'm all for change there and flexibility. The reality is that the fightingfortruckers.com website, which is part of OIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Driver Association, are dealing with the same issues. So if you look at OIDA's regulatory and legislative agenda, they're dealing with the same issues, but they're doing it as one voice.
And you've told me that you can join OIDA for $45.
$45 as a driver,
and you don't just have to be an independent operator.
Right, you can, and you've got a much bigger voice in Washington if you really want to affect change. You're not going to, so the regulators and the people you need to influence aren't going to be on the roads when you inconvenience them. You're going to be inconveniencing the people that are paying for your freight, and they are going to be angry. And that's I learned that the hard way.
One question before, is OIDA really? They are the same thing. They're talking about
same issues.
The same exact
truckers
issues.
across the country have the same issues.
But I'd see the thing about so one of the things is they're so frustrated about the ELDs apparently, according to some of the. But I didn't think that they so many that we talked to were like, hey, it's no big deal. I've been doing it a long time. Right. I think actually it helps me sleep, or I like the new things that the technology.
So think about what we've been doing at FreightWaves. We've been lobbying very hard for flexibility in hours of service. And if you think about what Administrator Martinez has been doing, they've been out talking to the industry. The first time in decades, I've seen them out talking to owner-operators about what they need. So the key is to keep lobbying Washington for change in the regulations around flexibility. What they're really asking for is flexibility in the regulations. And the way to go about that is through industry representation, being part of a collective voice.
We all support that.
Not trying to do it on your own. This is just going to make things harder, I think, for the industry.
And it's just strange to me. It seems like this is such a weird time for this to be happening. I mean, we were just talking about Donald Broughton's findings and his opinion, which we largely agree with, that 2018 was one of the best years for trucking in memory, right? So,
actually, and one of the points we didn't touch on that he mentioned, and to your point here, is that the quality of drivers and their experience grew over 2018 with shippers, meeting their demands more, and with companies with their wages getting higher, and with just a lot more accommodations being made to them.
And the small fleet owners that I've been talking to for the podcast at truckloadindexes.com, they all kind of say that this administrator, Martinez, the new FMCSA, has been the most open, the most listening, the most eager to...
Quick to respond.
Yeah, so for me, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance with why is this protest movement happening now?
I agree. Other than the simple power of social media.
Yeah, but it's times are good. I don't know. I mean, I have some suspicions, but it's just I don't really get it.
Well, similarly, at the same time, trucking companies, they're there's been a new ruling, from the FMCSA. Speaking of which, they're acting speedily in some cases. There's the California, they declared that their state is going to abide by these rest break rest break laws of every 5 hours you can have your 30-minute break and such. But the FMCSA has said that no, we're going to abide by a federal kind of one size fits all kind of ruling of these recent California rulings are not going to be applicable to the trucking industry, and that has left a new liability to some trucking companies open because now the Teamsters are appealing to the California Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and basically.
So the basic idea is if you go with. If you continue to operate and ignore the California regulation, in theory, it could come back to bite you.
Yeah, I guess that's how they're exposed.
It's still kind of in the air.
I don't know. We were talking about this, and what do you guys think? Because on the one hand, I know in a lot of cases we like uniformity, and we don't want to have a piecemeal kind of thing where every time you're in although tech has actually got some solutions for that, actually going from state to state. Yeah. But that notwithstanding, the ATA argues that this actually makes things safer to have a one size fits all kind of fit.
Yeah, I think that's
true.
I think that's cynical. I think that the ATA always says that what they want is about safety, and it usually isn't. Usually that's kind of their sort of the thing that makes it palatable to Washington, whatever they're asking for. I think in terms of uniformity versus local and state regulations. I think it's a complicated question because on the one hand, for ease of doing business, you want one legal regime. On the other hand, in the United States of America, we have federalism. We kind of appreciate the idea that innovation and best practices can come from the states. We like the fact that, hey, if I want clean air in my state, I can impose harsher regulations, or hey, if I want to try a new way of funding healthcare, I can pass a law in state capital and see if it works, and maybe it'll get adopted if it works. And so I kind of like the idea that forward-thinking states can try things out and see what the results are.
What do you think, Dean? Because on the one hand, of course, this is the FMCSA acting speedily, right?
Yep. So I tend to agree with JP. From an operational point of view, there's nothing worse than trying to run a truck fleet with different regulations at different states. And we've also got New York State just changed a ruling where the ELD mandate won't be enforced. I think in New York State there was something I read about last week. So I think there's some.
Wow.
Yeah,
really?
there's some, and I've got to catch up on the story. But and I had this debate on social media with some people when this came out in California. The reality is that I defy anybody to sit in a truck for 8 hours consistently and tell me that it's safe. Now, the reality is some days you can do it, most days you can't. Best practice is actually getting in and out of the vehicle fairly frequently to refresh and recharge and change the operating environment. The other thing is to check your load. You have to kick your tyres, check the load, make sure everything's good. So getting out of the truck is actually good practice. It's actually safer. Now, California's actually adopted the best practice, and I can give you a quick backstory.
Oh.
In 1999, I hosted the Department of Transport from Canada and the FMCSA, and we took them around our fatigue management pilot companies, which is called FMP.
Okay.
A lot of the best practice in how to run schedules and manage fatigue and sleep were implemented into the 2004 hours of service regulation. It was part of why they went away from 10 on, 8 off, which is an 18-hour workday, to a 24-hour workday, which is 11 on, 3 other, 10 off. 11, 3 and 10 makes 24, trying to get the human body in line with the rising and the setting of the sun and into a daily cycle. Part of that regulation in Australia is 5 hours on, half hour off, 5 hours on, 2 hours off. So every 5 hours, you're out of the truck.
What's your overall preferred method of all of these?
Even more frequently. You need to be out of that truck, and you need to be out of that truck frequently. You can't. 5 hours is even too long to be sitting there all the time, especially in winter where the miles are really, really hard. Yeah. So to say it's safer to only require a driver to have a break at 8 hours is absolutely, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, and that's what the Teamsters have said.
So I would argue you need to be having more breaks, not less. Now, the problem is with ELDs, of course, is that every minute you spend not driving, you're not actually making money. So it's a real flexibility question, I think, as opposed to...
right. Yeah, I tell you what, when I'm driving down the road, I don't want it, I'm telling the family, get out, get your stuff, hurry up and get back because you're costing us time. I can...
Well, there's a lot of science.
I can barely imagine.
There's some solid science to prove that that's actually really unsafe. The human body doesn't oscillate like that. We go through ultradian rhythms every 90 minutes. We go through a high point and a low point every 90 minutes. That's why people need to have a cigarette every 90 minutes. So there's a human oscillation where you go through peaks and troughs, and you'll have, like in a 7-hour period, 5 of these. And these low points are where you actually go through these zones where you can have micro sleeps and run off the road and hit things. And that's why you need to be changing your operating environment fairly frequently. So I could actually point to some solid science that would suggest that California was on the right track, not the wrong track.
Right.
Well, that sounds like some solid analysis right there. Thanks, Dean. Thanks for being a part of this, and we've got to hit a couple of other stories real quick because we don't want our listeners to suddenly start thinking that our podcast is going to be a lot longer than the tempo that we usually
We don't want them to go through a low point and fall asleep and run off the road.
Right. Daimler, if you haven't heard, is basically they announced at the beginning of this week at a Las Vegas trade show, which I forget the name of right now, but they've announced. I think it's a big announcement. It's really interesting. They're saying that their Cascadia, is it the Freightliner Cascadia?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's what Daimler makes. Yeah.
That it is starting about midway through this year. They're going to start making level 2 autonomous semis, which is exciting. And JP, you want to tell us what a level 2 is?
Yeah, it's basically it's dynamic cruise control. So the cruise control, you set the speed, but it can also automatically maintain a certain following distance from the vehicle in front of you, slowing and accelerating with that vehicle to maintain that distance. And it's also lane assist.
Yeah.
So there are cameras that see the painted lane markers to either side of your truck, and it sort of keeps you in the lane and tells you when you're drifting out of the lane. And then finally, some other sort of imaging technologies that kind of tell you when something's in your blind spot and help you see directly behind the trailer.
Sounds pretty awesome to me, considering that even last year there were people saying that autonomous is great and all, but we're going to be doing platooning for a little while, and maybe in a decade we'll see some of this level 2 and 3, and then in 2 decades maybe 4 and 5 or whatever. But they're actually amidst all of these other announcements, they also said, we're done with platooning. It's not as efficient as we thought. It's
really complicated to actually get an ROI off of it.
Because there's so many interruptions, and then you got to catch back up, and that reduces fuel efficiency.
You have trucks waiting on each other.
Exacerbated by ELDs now because every minute's money.
Yeah, and they also announced that they have the capability of making these level 4 and 5s, and really they want to get to level 4 within the decade. They want to be producing these trucks. Level 4, to me, the only difference between level 4 and 5 is that they actually have a steering wheel where you can kind of get, which I like level 4. Like level 5 scares me a little bit.
Level 4 is achievable. Level 5 seems kind of unimaginable without a lot of really expensive upgrades to smart infrastructure and things like that. It seems quite difficult and almost not even. I mean, I think that the safety improvements from level 4 alone will be dramatic and wonderful, and will avert so many tragic accidents.
Speaking of safety, right?
Yeah, actual safety.
Yeah, and drivers, do not be alarmed. There are the only jobs that it might take are the ones that you almost surely don't want to do.
It'll take away a lot of the task saturation that they've got now. Because if you look at how trucks are designed, there's too much stuff to do in the cab. There's too many screens to look at. There's just too much stuff going on. So when you get through the higher levels of autonomous trucks,
I hadn't even thought about
it actually it kind of it just lowers the amount of task saturation, the vigilance that you've got to have. And I think the driving task becomes really interesting as it relates to ELDs, because if I'm not driving, does that mean I could be theoretically resting? Mm-hmm. And that, that doesn't mean a cardboard cutout in the seat and I'm in the bunk, because that's
let's hope not.
That's what I would like to do. That's because the idea of letting someone else drive the truck is probably a lesser risk than me trying to stay there and stay awake.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of it's going to change the driving task. I think it's pretty exciting times.
It is. It's a very exciting time,
but I think just one other kind of yes, level 4 is one step away from fully autonomous semi-trucks, but I mean that's quite a step.
Quite a big step to me from that. The 4 and 5 are,
and it's never.
A big leap.
I don't think it's ever really been done before. I mean,
but they will be practicing with level 4 this very year, according to their announcements.
But even almost all of the autonomous vehicle pilots that I'm aware of have people in the car.
Yes, and there are actually a surprising large amount doing it. We could touch on that, both the startups and I guess what we would call the incumbents. Finally, JP, you wrote about brokers being cautiously optimistic. We've kind of touched on this throughout the podcast a little bit before, but you said there were two kind of important brokerages, I think young Chicago-based ones, that you said kind of sounded a somewhat ominous counterpoint to the optimism. What's all that about?
Yeah, just real quick. Last week I talked to. It's actually, I guess, the beginning of this. It was Monday when the sports story went up. I talked to two groups of brokers. One based in Chicago, several different shops, and one based in a group based in Chattanooga. The Chattanooga brokers overall were more optimistic. Everyone noticed that we've had really robust volumes on a national basis so far. Things really started turning on last week after the new year, and now it's up back where it kind of was. November, early December. It's things are coming alive again. Really robust volumes. The Chicago brokers almost kind of didn't trust the market though. They didn't really have data to back up their hunches. But they are waiting for things to really fall apart in terms of volume. I haven't seen anything that would suggest that. A lot of people thought that would happen with all of the freight that had been pulled forward to avoid the January 1st tariff deadline that didn't actually happen.
Which we're kind of starting to see again. So there's a new thesis emerging that the volumes could be potentially artificially high right now, as high as they are, because now, the new tariff mandate has been moved to simply March, and lots of retailers and others are trying to get ahead of that.
Yeah, we're not seeing it so much on the maritime side as in terms of ships coming in, but with the issue is that there is an incredible amount of congestion in the network of warehouses and distribution centers in major freight hubs like Los Angeles, Joliet, Dallas, etc. And so the normal amount of freight that is trying to move doesn't really have anywhere to go. And so we're seeing things get pushed into weird nooks and crannies of the nation's. We're seeing, for example, a lot of loads leaving LA to go to places like Stockton, California.
But it does have to do with maritime, right? Because it's coming into the ports and there's a lot of volume there.
But the problem is, what the issue is that in Southern California, there's about there's over 1 billion square feet of real estate of a warehouse space.
Right.
And it's all full. So whatever's coming in off the port doesn't have anywhere to go. And so they're having to divert it to these
secondary
these weird places.
Markets.
And so even though we're not seeing a crazy amount of tightness on the Trans-Pacific container trade right now, and I talked to a freight forwarder today who is explaining this to me. He said even though that is there's consistent freight, plenty of space, not too worried. It's just where does it go once it gets here? People are stacking boxes on things are getting cluttered and inefficient and cloggy and kind of the warehouse logistics side of it.
So do you think people have just pulled forward all this inventory without it having a home, and they're just kind of warehousing it close to where it landed at the port of entry, and now it'll just be dispersed across the country whenever people buy the products?
I guess
this is our current operating thesis, and if there is a reason to be, cautiously pessimistic, this could be it. But, well, one of the things that is exciting for us is that we have some new sponsorship. Chicago-based Redwood Logistics is a next-generation, strategically based integrated logistics provider that believes every company's needs are unique. For more than 15 years, the company has been providing solutions for moving and managing freight and sharing its knowledge across North America. Redwood Logistics is focused on making its customers more successful in their end markets by applying talented and motivated people, proven processes, and cutting-edge technologies to optimize their supply chain management efforts, and we thank them for their sponsorship.
Yeah, Redwood is a great company. We know a lot of folks out there, and it's really cool that they could step up and help support What the Truck.
Okay, so today we are visited with special guest Craig Fuller, CEO of FreightWaves. Craig, great to have you on.
Well, it's great to be here. I am so excited I got invited to your show. I'm a big fan.
Well, thanks for squeezing us in, even if it takes just 5 good minutes. Basically yesterday we had some industry leaders from all over Chattanooga meet up at what we're calling the new Freight Alley space. And just wanted to let you, like JP, you were there.
Yep.
And we just wanted to, kind of like get a sense of like what it's about, how we're bringing folks together. And let's do it all in 5 good minutes. Are you ready to play?
I am ready to play, absolutely.
Well, ready or not, here we go.
Yeah, so can you just tell us a little bit about the purpose of the meetup and the mobility think tank and kind of what the rationale is behind that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, when I started this business 2.5 years ago and FreightWaves was founded, one of the things that was sort of obvious to me was how much freight and logistics has been impacted and benefited from Chattanooga, but also how it impacts the broader Chattanooga economy. And I thought it was a natural place to raise capital for our business. What I discovered is that with the exception of sort of pockets that really weren't aligned and wasn't a lot of sort of collaboration between the different parties,
right.
That there wasn't a lot of internal support in the city for supporting our business, and we had to go elsewhere. And I thought that was really concerning and somewhat sad, because you have a city where you have the highest concentration of folks that are involved in transportation logistics in the entire country.
Wow.
But yet, as a city that sort of prides itself on a startup community, there wasn't a lot of broad support. And that really was from government to venture capital to really all of it. And so the hope of bringing it together is demonstrating how powerful this story could potentially be. Steve Case recognized it when he came to Chattanooga for Rise of the Rest, that Chattanooga, as he's described it, is the Silicon Valley of trucking.
That's right.
And it's a reason that we have had a lot of success, I think, is because we're able to draw from people that have experience in the community at FreightWaves. And then more broadly, I think it's a broader theme overall as a venture thing.
Is part of the challenge like almost bringing awareness to how much employment is? Like, didn't the Chamber of Commerce kind of underestimate how many were employed in transportation and logistics?
They not only underestimated, but they blew it, frankly. I mean, they had thought in their model that only about 400 people were described as non-trucking sort of professional folks involved in transportation logistics. There are 6,500 in the city. And so there's a gross misunderstanding of how important this sector is to the Chattanooga economy, but more broadly, nationwide, how important it is. And so I think what the goal was 2 things. One is, we can sit there and blame the chamber and the city all we want, but it's not fair. The fact is, as an industry, leaders in the industry have done a really poor job of working together. A lot of these folks have either worked with one another, so they have a lot of history, or have competed with one another, and more likely have done so in a very aggressive manner. And so it creates this sort of sense of a zero-sum game. And I think what we're hoping to see, and what we saw yesterday, and I think it started yesterday and has continued to hopefully will continue, is that by getting those individuals together as a force, we can be much more powerful.
Absolutely.
Craig, yesterday a lot of the conversation seemed to focus on building out a long-term talent pipeline for the industry in the city, and also figuring out a way to bring in enough capital so that the best ideas and organizations can really reach their potential.
Yeah, it's
in 2019, do we have any concrete goals, things that we're trying to accomplish to move the needle on those two things?
Well, I think at this stage, it's getting rallying call. It's getting the university together. It's getting the chamber behind it. It's getting the city behind it, and getting the industry to collaborate. And I think that's the goal. I think there's a challenge if you put broad, sort of big metrics up there without really having a base and having support. It's going to be more difficult to achieve. And I think right now it's just bringing people together and collaborating.
And is that easier said than done, or how?
No, there is. If you saw it yesterday, we had 60 people in the city of Chattanooga. That's a decent size.
These are mostly C-level people.
These are C-level executives from multiple companies. There were at least 20 companies in the room. And so by bringing them together, I think there was an opportunity to say, hey, we need to fix this. And I think there was a common theme for the folks that talked about the desire to fix it. Talent pool you mentioned. One of the mistakes that cities like Chattanooga make, as I've seen, is they want to be focused on broader venture themes, which is we want to be big media, we want to be big software. Cities like Chattanooga need to focus on what they can do successfully and where they have an advantage. Chattanooga doesn't have an advantage in consumer software. And so why focus on it? Focus on things that you have a natural inherent advantage over. And that's the message I hope that we get out.
Wow, I think we're getting it out there. You did it. You win the T-shirt. And thanks for being on, Craig. Just fantastic to have you, even for these 5 good minutes.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Awesome. JP, it is high time that you and I play Big Deal, Little Deal. Ooh. What's the deal with you?
Oh, okay.
All right.
All right, getting ready.
All right, so what could go wrong? Why don't you hit lead off? Or I will hit lead off. Ready, go. Transport Ministry hails Brexit truck test a success. Big deal or little deal?
I'm still waiting to see what happens with the Theresa May deal and whether the Conservative Party will be able to, scuttle it and go for a no-deal Brexit. But, I mean, this is, in theory, it's good for logistics companies.
Parcel carriers shown during peak delivery period. Firm data shows. Big deal or little deal?
It's a huge deal. The fact that UPS and FedEx were in the high 90s on time delivery is, it's an incredible achievement, and it's also raising the bar for consumer expectations.
Fracking jobs peaked in June, so did flatbed rates. Big deal or little deal?
I think it's a big deal because we're looking to see what happens with the price of WTI and whether the Brent WTI spread will stay wide enough to encourage more oil production in the U.S. next year.
Reversing a long downward trend, U.S. CO2 emissions rose in 2018. Big deal or little deal?
I don't know. I think it's a little deal. I don't know. I mean, it's a blip in a long downward trend. Deep data to become the greatest natural resource, tech execs say. Big deal or little deal?
Well, this came from the Consumer Tech Association event where Gary Shapiro was talking about how we're going to solve huge human problems with tech over the next decade, and data is becoming interconnected. I think it's a big deal.
Growth of ride-hailing market in the U.S. is strewn with uncertainties. Big deal or little deal?
Little deal. It's a good article by our tech correspondent Vishnu, but we expect IPOs from Lyft and Uber this year, and the on-demand market will continue to grow.
Autonomous cargo vans to deliver Walmart's groceries with UDELV. Big deal or little deal?
Little deal. It's another pilot by Walmart that seems to be flailing to keep up with competitors in this space.
JB Hunt expands its last mile big and bulky business with Corey acquisition. Big deal or little deal?
It's too little too late for you right now, JP. There's no sense. It's at the time we've lost it. But I will say it is a big deal. JB Hunt is a big company making a strategic move in a big space, and this will make their footprint even bigger. And I don't care.
I feel like it was my fault.
No, I love your analysis.
I bet it was
because
it's very
good.
It was because I didn't drink beer.
You know what? Let's hope so. So next time you'll bring the heat, baby. Dean, been great to have you.
Thanks so much, Dean.
Pleasure.
Thanks to have. It's wonderful to have you, and thanks for everybody for listening. And we will see you next week on What the Truck.
Well, thanks for listening to this week's episode, and thanks again to Redwood Logistics for helping us out and partnering with us on What the Truck.
As always, we go into more detail about each of the topics we've talked about today on our website, FreightWaves.com. We will continue to publish this podcast weekly, so be sure to subscribe to What the Truck on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. Also, make sure to leave us a review to let us know what you think of our new podcast. That'll do it for today. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next week on What the Truck.